So as folks continue to join us, I invite you to introduce yourself in the chat, and we've got a big agenda today. So I'll go ahead and get us started and start moving us through our today's presentation. Before we dive into our panelists that we do have with us today, just wanted to start with a little expression of love and appreciation to all of the federal agency staff that take care of our trails and help with trails planning and funding programs, or that clean the bathrooms at our trailheads. There's a lot of chaos out there right now in regards to both federal funding and federal agency staffing. We at the Trails Coalition don't have a lot of really specific information yet. We're even hearing from federal agency partners at the region level and other levels that they still don't have a lot of information about what all the Oregon impacts are. So stay tuned to the Oregon Trails Coalition newsletter. As we know more, we'll share more, and we'll have we'll be taking some actions in collaboration with other partners in the region and across the country. But in the meantime, just wanted to acknowledge all the great work that gets done by the humans in our federal agencies, and especially the ones that those of us in Oregon have been working with as partners and colleagues and friends. And yeah, we care about you, and we're gonna kind of keep waving the flag of how important the work that you do is. And so it's a hard context we're all sitting in together today. But we'll move into this webinar because along with addressing that directly, I think it's also important that we do kind of continue to collaborate on good work wherever we can. So today we're here for our Trails Funding webinar, and I'm sharing a graphic here from our Ready, Set, Plan guide, which my colleague Everett, I think, is going to help me out today by dropping some links in the chat throughout to some of the resources shared. But wanted to start with some questions that are helpful to ask as you have a Trails funding project, to help clarify what your need is before you start trying to match your need to funding sources. And so having clarity about what stages of the trail project life cycle that you're in and the costs associated with them, learning if you're a partner or if you're a land management field staff, wherever you are kind of in this picture of collaboration, understanding kind of what fits in the budget, as is, or in a future budget versus where you need to look for external funding. And then kind of what is that strategy on going after funding? What can be provided in kind? We're also going to be talking today both about funding resources and other kind of technical resources that are available for projects. What might work to be crowd funded or community funded or privately funded versus when is a competitive grant funding opportunity going to be the best fit? And so the Ready, Set, Plan guide has some resources and a kind of workbook that you can work through if you haven't worked on a trail development or planning project before. And this is just a graphic about the different phases of kind of a trail project development. And so kind of just getting a handle of this vocabulary of where you are in the stage. Are you looking for funding for a feasibility study or land acquisition or a stakeholder engagement process and public input process, or are you to the design phase or contracting and construction, or are you in the maintenance and stewardship phase of something? So just kind of understanding that will help you in your process. And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about making the case. And one of my favorite new facts from our most recent statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan and all the survey work that went into that is we now know that more than 80% of Oregonians reported using local trails in the last comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. So I just want to share that with all of you in appreciation of your work and your desire to fund trails for your community, because trails are deeply valued community assets. And depending on your specific project and the funding opportunity, all that community desire or all the various benefits of trails may be very helpful to highlight. And so understanding which of the things on this list is most helpful for your project or most relevant to your project will be a valuable part of it. And with that, I'm going to move into welcoming the rest of our presenters. And we're going to start with Jody Belfi from Oregon Parks and Recreation Department to share about OPRD's funding programs. And we'll give Jody a moment to share her screen and not have to talk at the same time. But she's a pro. Here we go. I'll pass it to you, Jody.
Thank you, Steph, and good to see all the good names in the audience. So welcome everybody for joining us. So I'm Jody Belfi, Grant Coordinator at the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, otherwise known as Oregon State Parks. And I'll give a brief rundown of the programs that we administer at OPRD. These are the 5 different recreation grant programs that are administered by OPRD. I do want to, carrying Steph's acknowledgement of the federal challenges, just to acknowledge that the first 2 programs on this list are federally funded, both RTP and LWCF. Both of those programs are running as normal at the moment. They were affected by that temporary pause, but we do have access to our funding, although I will acknowledge that with the Land and Water Conservation Fund program was impacted by layoffs on Friday. So we have access to our money, but we do know that the capacity at the federal level will be challenged. And then the other 3 on the list are state-funded programs. So I will just give a very quick rundown of all these. I did drop a link in the chat to our website where you can find a lot more detailed information, as well as get in touch with the relevant program coordinator. So before I go into each individual program, these are just some general guidelines for them. We mainly are funding construction projects, so development and restoration. We also will fund land acquisition. And then as I go into each program, I'll acknowledge some other carve-outs we have for planning and some other unique type of funding that we have available. But in general, these are construction projects. And also in general, they should be shovel ready, although we do allow for some final design and engineering in the grants. The applicant eligibility does vary by program, which I'll go over. So public land managers are eligible for all of them, and then 2 of them nonprofits can apply. So with those programs that are open to nonprofits, there might be some decision making at your level on whether it's best for the public agency or the nonprofit to apply, and we can always help walk through those decisions. These are competitive programs, some more than others. They're also reimbursement based. We can do some advance payments in some cases, but in general, applicants are paying for expenses once they have a grant, and then we reimburse them. All of them require a match, which I'll go over specifically for each program. And in general, you have 2 years to complete your project. So those are just some things as you consider how to right size the project that you apply to for our programs. The funding decisions aren't made at the staff level. We have committees for each of these programs, and they are the ones who review and score and recommend projects for funding. Then those decisions go up to the OPRD Department Commission. And then for their federal programs, those projects also go through a federal approval process. So just to highlight kind of the layers of kind of who's looking at these and what that process is like. And then for all of our programs, they do have to be on public land, but the access requirements vary by program. So some of them, we have to see that the land is publicly accessible for at least 20 years, where some have perpetuity requirements where that land is dedicated forever to recreation. And so with the link I dropped in the chat, you can go learn about each of our programs. You can find the policy manual. We post schedules online for each program. And then in some of them, we do have webinars. So we have recordings on at that link where you can watch past webinars that we've hosted where we get way more into the weeds than I'll get today. And then we have an online grant application process, OPRD grants. That's the same for all of our programs, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with already. And then just to emphasize that our staff here, our grant coordinators, are here to help you. Don't ever hesitate to email or call us just to chat about your ideas or ask any program questions. Okay, so the first program I'll talk about quickly is the Recreational Trails Program, or RTP. We get about $1.5 million and have that available for our annual grant cycle, and that funding comes from the Federal Highway Administration. Of that 1.5 million, we set aside 30% for motorized trail projects, so motorized and snowmobile. That's part of the federal requirements. And then applicants, when they apply, have to have 20% match, so 20% contribution to the project, whether that's cash or volunteer labor, something like that. There's a $10,000 minimum award. And then for our non-motorized trail projects, we have a $150,000 recommended maximum, which we don't have that for motorized because that funding isn't very competitive. So we need to be able to spend that and have some other flexibility. Most commonly, we are funding trail construction projects, heavy restoration, as well as trailheads. So anything from a new trail system to filling a gap in a system to doing some heavy restoration after a wildfire, replacing bridges, kind of all of those things. Other than that, we can also fund safety and education. So we have a little carve out for education or safety as far as user-facing education. We can also fund land acquisition, but because this isn't a large pot of money, that's pretty rare in the program. We can buy trail equipment, so trail building or trail maintenance equipment. And then one thing I especially want to highlight is that RTP can also be used to assess an existing trail or existing trail system for accessibility or maintenance. So that could be doing an assessment so that you can provide better information to trail users on what to expect, what the grade is, et cetera, as well as doing that assessment work to look at for accessibility, what improvements you can make in the future. So really want to highlight that because I just want to make that more widely known that we can do that. For RTP applicants, covers the whole gamut. So all types of public agencies, local, state, federal, tribal, and then nonprofits are also eligible. So those are typically nonprofits who partner with a public land manager and might be in a better position to take on a grant. The next grant cycle opens this September. It's annual. I always try to open around September 1st. And then applications will be due in mid-November. So check out our website for that one. Next up, federally funded program, Land and Water Conservation Fund, or LWCF. Oregon gets about $4 million from this source per year. And then 60% of that funding is set aside for local governments and tribal governments. The remaining, or up to 40%, is for state agencies to apply for. And then if they don't, then that money rolls over to the local side. This program has a 50-50 match requirement, so 1-to-1 ratio on what you're requesting. Funds all types of outdoor recreation, so playgrounds, ball fields, et cetera, as well as trails. One important thing to note when it comes to trails is that when you use land and water, that the property boundary has to be dedicated to outdoor recreation in perpetuity. So especially targeting parks in your area that have already used LWCF because those strings are already attached. But if you're looking at a linear trail, those can just get really tricky. So that's something you'll want to reach out to us to chat about before you apply if you are thinking about a linear trail that might touch a lot of different properties. The grant cycle will open this fall, and those dates will be posted on our website soon. And I am covering this program for our coordinator at least through May. So in the meantime, you can contact me with questions. Local government grant program. This is one of our larger programs. We have $15 million a year available, and it is open now. So this is for cities, counties, park districts, port districts, other local governments. The match requirement does vary by population of your area, your service area. So it's either a 20% up to a 50% match requirement based on that. And then the application deadline varies by funding category, but April and May are the months when applications are due. And the funding categories are split into small grants, so those are grants up to 100,000, large grants up to $1 million. So again, much bigger pot of money. And then this one has a planning carve out. So there's for small communities, and you can find the population limits on our website. We do planning grants for up to $50,000. A lot of that is public outreach type stuff as for small communities to do master comprehensive type plans. And then our grant coordinator, Mark, hosted a webinar just last week about this where him and our coworker, Karen, got way more into the weeds, and you can find a recording and copy of those slides on our website. Next up is the ATV grant program, fairly self-explanatory. This funds all things ATV and has up to, or right now we're about $15 million of biennium. 10% of the funds are set aside for development, trail planning, land acquisition, and the remaining funds are for operations and maintenance grants, which public agencies get on a regular basis for managing ATV areas, as well as law enforcement. And there is a 20% match, and it's like RTP where it's all types of public agencies, local, state, federal, tribal, as well as nonprofits, both partners, and we do have a nonprofit that owns public land in Oregon. And their next grant cycle will open in the fall. They already had their regular operations grant cycle. So in the fall, they'll have another grant cycle for other types of projects. And then the last of our recreation grant programs is the County Opportunity Grant Program. This one's up to $850,000, or they have $850,000 a year to spend on this one. Match is either 25 or 50% based on the population of your county. And it's all for county operated campgrounds. This is from RV registration fees, and a portion of that goes to counties through this competitive program. But as counties think about projects, we can also fund trails within those campgrounds that you manage. Grant cycle should open around August with applications due in October. And before I pass it off, just want to also mention our heritage grant programs. Those you can find links to at the same link that I dropped in the chat. We have 8 different programs that fund all types of heritage, cultural, historic type projects. And I specifically want to point out 2 of their programs this year. For archaeological survey resources, I know that can be a challenge to come up with funding for those types of things. And especially if you're applying to a federal grant program, that's something you'll want to plan for. They have 2 programs that can potentially fund archaeological surveys at the community level. But I know we are short on time, so I'm not going to go into detail, but you'll get a copy of these slides and can go on our website to learn more. I'll pass it back to you, Steph.
Thanks, Jody. And just a little bit of housekeeping before I pass it to our next speaker. We've had some great questions come in through the chat so far. We will have a formal Q&A at the end, so I'll pull those questions out of the chat and voice them to our speakers after everyone speaks. And you know, panelists might have a chance to answer in the chat as well, but we'll make sure we share those for everyone's benefit. And we will also have a recording of this webinar up on the Oregon Trail Coalition blog next week, along with all the links that were shared, so that you'll have an easy place to come back to for some of these links if you miss them. And with that, I'm happy to pass it off to Andy Spurka from Department of Fish and Wildlife, talking about the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund. Thanks for joining us, Andy.
Yeah, good morning. Hopefully my screen share is coming in.
Looks great, thank you.
Perfect. Let me just rearrange for a second here. I got 3 screens on my end, so sometimes everyone jumps back and forth, but I think I got it. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, it is afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Like Steph said, my name is Andy Spurka, and I'm actually filling in for a colleague of mine today, Reba Gilman, who is the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund Grant Coordinator. My role at ODFW, while similar, is the PFA Grants Coordinator. It's a different granting program. So please bear with me as I work to present information in this program in the next few minutes. That said, thank you again for having us today. Really appreciate the opportunity to engage. I plan to try my best to give a real brief overview of the grant program, talk about the upcoming opportunities for funding. Any questions, of course, that I might not be able to answer later today at the Q&A session, I will put my colleague Reba's contact info at the end of this presentation. So we'll get into it. OCRF, the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund. OCRF is the acronym you're going to hear throughout this presentation and other documents online. OCRF was formed with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife for the broad purpose of protecting and enhancing species that are within the Oregon Conservation Strategy and to create new opportunities for outdoor recreation and community engagement. This program is striving for that intersection between conservation and recreation. The grant program has a very engaged, passionate advisory committee that you see on screen here. They offer diverse perspectives from around the state. The duties of this committee include reviewing projects and advising the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission on project selection, who make final select funding decisions for this grant program. The committee holds monthly public meetings, and anyone is, of course, welcome to attend. I put OCRF's URL in the chat. It's also on the bottom here, and you can sign up to the list server going to our webpage. So the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund was founded in 2019 by Oregon legislature with the mandate of implementing Oregon conservation and nearshore strategies, expanding outdoor recreation opportunities, investing in science and research to inform management decisions regarding fish, wildlife, and their habitats, restoring healthy ecosystems, connecting youth, families, diverse and underserved communities to the outdoors through outdoor equity, and to help all Oregonians take voluntary, proactive steps to conserve and protect fish and wildlife for the habitat for future generations. OCRF has dedicated a significant portion of the available funds to this program and will work with these audiences and stakeholders to identify and fund opportunities and projects that mutually support the interest, intersection, and engagement of underserved communities. The program's funded through general funds, direct donations, and specific appropriations, such as drought funds. OCRF fund currently holds roughly $500,000 in base program funds that can go towards a broad type of projects, as well as roughly $800,000 in funds specifically earmarked for projects that address the impacts of drought in Oregon. ODFW typically allocates $1 million per round of grant funding. Drought funding goals enhance ecosystem resilience, protect and enhance habitats and species in drought-impacted areas, and should promote awareness of and impacts from drought and the changing climate. The OCRF program offers broad applicant eligibility, so any tribe, local, state, federal agency, nonprofit, universities are all eligible to apply. On screen here is the program's grant review criteria. Submitted projects are scored on clarity, cost efficiency, outdoor equity, high impact on individuals or target species or habitats, track record, partnerships leverage, measurability, and of course, alignment with the Oregon Conservation Strategy and other programmatic priorities. We do run a competitive granting program and open 2 grant cycles per year, usually a spring and fall grant open solicitation. Project awards are usually capped at $50,000, although the upcoming grant cycle, we have raised the funding maximum to $100,000 for drought projects. Grant periods are typically 1 to 3 years long. Our current spring 25 grant cycle will open and begin accepting applications March 20th. Through May 9th. So there's still plenty of time to apply if you're interested. We're looking to fund a broad portfolio of projects that address drought on Oregon's fish, wildlife, and their habitats, as well as outdoor equity in conservation and recreation. After an extensive review process, projects to the Fish and Wildlife Commission are expected to be announced in September for final approval. Again, that's for that upcoming solicitation in March. Overall, OCRF has funded 167 projects in ecoregions all across Oregon. As shown on the map of Oregon here, the program has awarded about $7.5 million in funding these conservation and recreation projects. Here are several trail projects that OCRF has funded that might be of interest to this group. OCRF has invested in projects such as Boulder Creek Wilderness Trails and monitoring project led by Source One Serenity, the project which engaged with veterans to conduct trail work. and Tinkerbell Trail Reconstruction and Community Engagement Project with Eastern Oregon Trail Alliance are a few examples of successful projects that you see on screen here and are eligible for this grant program. Of course, if you're interested to learn more, you can go to the web page that you see all of our funded projects and read more about the grant conservation and outdoor engagement work that's been done around this site. You can also learn more about the application and granting process here as well. It's a great resource. Definitely recommend it if you're considering applying for the open solicitation in March. Like I said, I am filling in for my colleague Riva today. So here's their contact info if you have any additional questions that I may not be able to answer later. But with that, thanks for the opportunity, and I'll hand it back to Steph.
Thank you, Andy, for jumping in for Team OCRF. Really appreciate all the good information. And next, we'll pass it to Janine Balek with Oregon State Marine Board.
Can everybody see my screen?
Looks great, thank you.
So I'm going to focus on motorized and non-motorized access, as well as grant opportunities for NGOs to do some education and outreach around non-motorized boating. So we have three major types of program. We have a motorized program, which is the BFG, excuse me, the WAG, which is our non-motorized, and small can fund motor or non-motorized. So just a quick chart to kind of show what is eligible and not eligible. And then education outreach, it's really variable. It can fund everything from taking out guided trips with people to expose them to boating, school programs where you're talking about boating safety, waterway safety, the transportation. If you're taking them out over for a whole day, it can cover the food, as well as your staff training for first aid, CPR, specialty equipment. Or if your group wants to create a specialized map, water trail, signage, outreach, those are the types of things that we can fund under the program. And then we also do construction, permitting, which would be engineering, the actual permits, archaeological, hydro, geotechnical. We can help buy property and just kind of help out by providing technical assistance if you're not sure how to approach improvements to either motor or non-motorized boating access. And then we are currently accepting applications. And this timeline is focused on projects that have a total value of over $50,000. If you have a project in mind that's under $50,000, that would be great for our small grant program. There is no set timeline on those. We take applications on a first come, first served basis. So if you're interested, please let us know. And then all of our projects must be completed by June 30th of 2027. Match minimum of 25%, and it can come in a lot of different shapes and sizes, other grants. And then that is me. I will drop some links into the chat, but if you are interested in water trails, water access, expanding opportunities for people to learn how to go paddling, whether it's in a canoe, a kayak, a stand-up paddleboard, a raft, let us know. We'd be excited to work with anyone. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
And then go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. If you had anything else to say, go for it.
Nope, I was going to say it's back to you, Steph.
All right. Thanks so much for the information. So I think Janine is your top resource on this call for all things related to water trails. And really glad you're here with us today. And next, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Dan Miller with the Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program for a different kind of assistance other than funding, which he'll tell you more about. And we've got your slides, and I think soon we'll have them at full power, it looks like.
If I can find, let's see here. How's that look?
There, now you're at full size. Looks great.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Miller. Like Steph said, I work for a planning assistance program with the National Park Service called Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance. We're a little different than what Janine and Jody and the other OPR or Oregon programs in terms of what we do. We respond to requests for assistance, and we actually provide technical assistance, planning assistance to work with you on your locally led, locally driven outdoor recreation trail type project. So we, again, are RTCA, or Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance, and we bring the mission of the National Park Service to communities across the state and across the country. We actually operate in all 50 states and U.S. protectorates. We've been around for about 30 years, hoping to be around for 30 more. We support locally led conservation and outdoor recreation efforts. And we have an application process that is due March 1st. So it's coming up. If after this presentation you're interested in RTCA assistance, you can hit me up via email. I'll put my email in the chat, and we can talk a little bit whether it makes sense. I encourage you to talk to me first before applying to make sure the project's appropriate. Our model, we operate by invitation. That's an application for assistance. We only work on projects if we're invited in and that we have willing landowners. That is, if you're operating on someone else's land, then we need to know that they're okay with that. We provide technical assistance. It's primarily planning assistance, but we do a suite of other things. And we collaborate with your team. We're not a grant funding organization, so if you apply for our assistance, you get assistance, you don't get money. Projects typically last about 1 to 3 years. They can be longer depending on the complexity. And we really like to focus in on assessing your needs with you and bringing skills that bridge the gap for your team and local experts. So we're here to work with you all on your project. And so if you have a trails related project or something that focuses on building healthy communities, restoring or reducing impacts from outdoor recreation, planning parks, trails, rivers, or open space and access to public lands, hit me up and we can chat about how assistance might work. So real quickly, how to apply. You can go to nps.gov/RTCA and take a look at our program, and you can download the application and take a look also as well as the types of projects we do. And again, applications are due the 1st of every year. What your application needs is a completed application form. You can do it on the PDF, or you can copy and paste the questions and do it in like Word or whatever. We need a site location map, and then a description of what the project is, as well as what you're wanting RTCA to do, who your partners are, and what their roles are. We need a minimum of at least 3 commitment letters. Those are more than letters of support. They're detailing the commitment of those partners to the planning process, that they're going to attend regular meetings, etc. And then any other sort of optional supplemental information that you might have to help us with the application. Again, I encourage you all to, if you're interested, to reach out, because we can really help you help you on your application, making sure that it's a good application and the project is appropriate. We work on projects that are expected to yield results. That's one of the ways that we're judged. We want the roles and contributions of project partners clearly defined. We want evidence of community support if that's appropriate. Some projects, when you're dealing with large regional things or conceptual, it may not be there yet. And that the project fits within our focus areas. And you can take a look at those on nps.gov/RTCA. Again, here's our website. This is where our application lies, as well as our contacts for each state. But you can either contact me, Dan Miller, or Brianna Truden. We're the two RTCA operatives, so to speak, in Oregon. So that's all I've got. And I appreciate your time, and feel free to hit me up if you have questions about how RTCA and NPS can help you out on your trail project.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. There have been a number of great projects in Oregon that have gotten support from the Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program, and I hope to see more too in the future. Now I'm going to cover some additional funding and assistance opportunities, and I did see one question in the chat before specifically about paved trails, which are certainly are not ineligible for some of the previous grant opportunities, but sometimes from a funding size perspective, they're not always the easiest or best fit. But one program I wanted to make sure that was on folks' radar that really is made for paved trails, especially that serve a transportation goal as well as a recreation goal, is the Oregon Community Paths program administered by the Oregon Department of Transportation. There's a current cycle that's already in play. So applications were already due for the current cycle. And we don't have dates on the next cycle yet, but this program generally runs at least every 2 years. And it usually has different categories for project development and planning, and then for construction, reconstruction, and major resurfacing are all kind of part of the construction category. And they are for multi-use paths that improve access and safety for people walking and bicycling. Eligible entities are local governments, school districts, tribal governments, and nonprofits working closely with the local land managers. As I said, we don't know for sure when or how big the next cycle will be, but I did want to flag that it's a major Oregon Trails Coalition goal to advocate for additional funding for this Oregon Community Paths program this year as the legislature works on a new transportation funding package, because this is part of our state transportation department, and this program has been vastly oversubscribed. So please join us in advocating for more state level funding for Oregon Community Paths. Another program that's available specifically more for system planning. So if you need to do a trail system plan, and again, with a focus more on paved trails or kind of transportation trails in your system, or need to update your transportation system plan with trails info, look into the Transportation Growth Management Planning grants offered by our department, it's a joint program of ODOT and DLCD. There's this opportunity generally runs annually. There's not information online yet for the 2025 cycle, but I would expect there to be another cycle opening later this spring. So check back there if what you're looking for is kind of system level trail planning resources. And another program that has made some really major investments in paved trails in Oregon, like the historic Columbia River Highway State Trail, and planning work for non-paved trails like the Oregon Coast Trail, has been the Federal Lands Access Program. As we've already acknowledged today, a lot is up in the air with our federal funding program. So we don't know what to expect for this, but because Oregon has so much federal land, I want this program to be on folks' radar, because it has been a really powerful funding tool for some projects that are on or adjacent to federal lands, but for which there is a responsibility is vested in the state or local government. So it's a kind of special kind of category of trail projects there. But because we are a state with so much, I mean, more than 50% of our land in Oregon is federal lands, there are lots of opportunities to make this program work for trails. And again, it can fund capital improvements, enhancement, surface preservation, safety, transit, planning, and research. And these are large grants. And so these are the kind of grants that take kind of extra time and collaboration and coordination to put together. So want to put it on your radar now, even though there's not a plan, I think another planned opportunity until 2026. And as we know, lots up in the air right now. I'm going to talk about a few other grants and assistance opportunities. Our friends at Travel Oregon have both some technical assistance available as well as a generally annual competitive grant cycle. So you can check out their Ask, and that should say Ask an Expert as opposed to Ask and Expert. Sorry for that typo there. The Ask an Expert program is another kind of smaller chunk technical assistance program where you can just fill out a form and get a 1-hour consultation with some folks who might be able to help you kind of navigate feasibility or concept planning or other resources, and then kind of provide you with a little write-up of follow-up resources. And then I also put a QR code here, and Everett's dropping links in the chat for the Travel Oregon industry newsletter, where you can make sure that you hear announcements about future competitive grant opportunities. That is another grant program that the current cycle is fully in swing, so applications were already due for the current cycle. Another, what has been a perennial opportunity has been from our friends at American Trails. They've had a trail capacity program. I think their funding mix has shifted a little bit year to year, but that's something good to keep an eye on, especially for trails on primarily Forest Service land. I think this program has historically funded, so take a look at that. Oregon Parks Foundation, as part of the Oregon Community Foundation, has a small grants program with a due date coming up soon. These are for very, very small projects, so kind of $1,000 to $5,000 grants that can include acquisition, restoration programs, so like interpreter programs, as well as trail construction and interpretation. So pretty broad. You can take a look at that program and see if it's the right fit. Again, those are very small grants, but if that's what you need for your project, then it's a right-sized opportunity. And then I also wanted to say, again, where things are up in the air, but in Oregon, state level funding for big paved trails is really limited. Even the Oregon Community Paths Program grants have historically been relatively small grants. And so federal funding has been really key in Oregon for some larger trail projects. So the Federal Highway Administration has generally had grant cycles available. The most recent one just closed at the end of January, so I don't know what the next opportunity will be. It was called Build. Before that, it was called Raise. Further back, it was called Tiger. So if any of these acronyms ring a bell, they kind of refer to more or less versions of the same program. But I wanted this to be on the folks' radar for anyone working on bigger paved trail advocacy or development. These are national level grant programs that are extremely competitive, but historically as much as 19% of these broader transportation funds have gone to trail projects around the country. So trails are definitely have been eligible. And it's extra important for these kinds of grant opportunities to have really strong local and regional collaboration. So even though there's not a cycle open right now, it is the right time to be kind of building support for your project among local decision makers and policymakers, et cetera. And then this is just a roundup of some other kind of opportunities that might be relevant locally or or some of them are nationally, but local governments, local metropolitan planning organizations, soil and water conservation districts, park districts sometimes have different, small local grant opportunities available. For folks in the Portland metro area, Metro has nature and neighborhoods grants, regional travel options grants, so both kind of on the parks and natural area side and transportation facilities side. And I should also say the other kind of local or regional entity to make sure you're connected with is your regional destination management organization or your local destination management organization, RDMOs or DMOs, as they're often shorthanded. Sometimes those local tourism organizations also have opportunities to support either local stewardship capacity or trail development for visitors as well as locals alike. Nationally, the Rails to Trails Conservancy has a fund, and a lot of outdoor industry private partners have grants and assistance programs. So any of the major outdoor brands, you might want to take a look at their website and either they might have a community benefit page or other page where you can learn about possible funding opportunities. Often those private opportunities fund programs. Some of them also fund infrastructure. Often nonprofits and schools are the eligible entities for those, but there's no kind of one rule across the board for those. And then I wanted to highlight a little bit of assistance that's available directly through the Oregon Trails Coalition. I mentioned the Travel Oregon Ask an Expert format, so you can connect with me through that Travel Oregon program for kind of a 1-hour consultation about your project with a list of follow-up resources. And I'm happy to talk with you about trails development and planning and funding resources or kind of stewardship capacity or kind of more general nonprofit stuff. Happy to spend some time with the folks who are working on trails in Oregon and provide you with a kind of follow-up list of resources. So that's available through the Travel Oregon Ask an Expert link that I shared before. We also have funding right now through Travel Oregon for Signature Trails stakeholder engagement event support. So if you are affiliated with one of the 15 kind of recognized Oregon signature trails that you can see on our website, we have small amounts of funding available to support specifically stakeholder engagement events. So getting elected leaders engaged, getting other agency project managers and leaders and local community members and business members kind of engaged in the future stewardship and development of those big trail projects. And then lastly, we have some trail skills training assistance available. Some of that funding has historically come from the Bureau of Land Management and is a little bit up in the air, as you might guess right now. But we also have some funding available from Travel Oregon, and my colleague Everett manages those trail skills training programs, including our request for backcountry first aid CPR for trail crews and other assistance available as well. And sometimes we can either just provide direct funding to a group for trail skills training needs, or sometimes we can help match you with the training provider and pay them directly. Both are possibilities if your local group or organization or community has trail skills training needs. And those can be everything from saw training or kind of trail maintenance training to crew leader training or kind of learning more about scouting and trail building and creation. So that is a quick overview of all of the, not all of the opportunities out there, but the ones that we were able to highlight today. And I will go ahead and stop my share and we'll go into Q&A mode. And so folks are welcome to drop questions in the chat or using the Q&A button And yeah, we'll have a few minutes for questions for any of our panelists. And do just want to repeat that we will share a recording of this and the links to the programs that folks shared on the call on the Oregon Trails Coalition blog by sometime next week at the latest. So that folks don't have to ask that specific follow-up question. But other folks might have caught questions in the chat while I was talking, but Jody, I did catch a little bit of a question if you want to maybe do a little bit of differentiating between OPRD programs and kind of which are eligible for federal lands versus other entities. I think that might be helpful for folks to hear again.
Yeah, great. And I actually screenshotted Janine's chart because I thought that was so helpful. And I should do that next time. So federal lands, the federal land managers or their nonprofit partner can apply to our recreational trails program and our ATV grant program. Our other 3 grant programs, local government, county opportunity, and land and water are not open to federal lands or their partners. Hope that answers it. You're muted, Steph.
Thank you. I was thanking you and now I'll thank you for that too. We have a great question in the chat that I hear a lot and it would be great to hear people talk about it, which is funding available for maintenance and operations on trails and any good suggestions for that. And I'll maybe kick it off and then invite anyone else to ring in as well. I would say that general like annual maintenance and operations is really hard. If it's a bigger kind of resurfacing project or kind of bridge, replacement, kind of those bigger kind of deferred maintenance kind of projects, often these grant construction programs we've overviewed will also be available for those bigger resurfacing or reconstruction projects. The day-to-day stuff is much harder. On the federal level, the past 5 years we've had the Great American Outdoors Act funding, which has provided a lot of deferred maintenance funding for local facilities. We don't know what the future of that program is going to be. But if for anyone who's doing work on federal lands, the best course of action has really been to work with the local forest staff to find out what is on their deferred maintenance list in order to kind of elevate trail projects that you think need to be on that funding maintenance list for projects. Outside of federal lands, I would love to hear from any of our other panelists if you have guidance on the elusive support for maintenance and operations.
Yeah, so the Marine Board has an O&M program for motorized boating access sites that are operated or owned by cities, counties, ports, park districts, and state agencies. So if you know of sites, prompt those landowners to make sure they're participating in our program. It doesn't cover everything, but it's one of the few programs that I'm aware of nationally that can help with standard O&M on a daily basis.
And I'll just chime in and say that the only O&M funding that OPRD has is through our ATV grant program. So that's only to land managers for operations and maintenance of their ATV or OHV facilities. Our other programs, like Steph already mentioned, are a better fit for that, like major rehab, major restoration type thing. So yeah, unfortunately, we don't have a good resource either for non-motorized trails.
Any other wisdom on that? We also had a good question, and Rita, I saw your follow-up that I think that specifically Travel Oregon's Ask an Expert program, I think doesn't specifically have a land use lawyer, but I know that this is a question that comes up. And I wonder, Dan, if you're still with us and available, Does RTCA ever kind of get into some of that part of feasibility? Is that ever part of the assistance you provide in terms of kind of that legal consultation?
We don't have a legal staff, but we're familiar with, you know, things like recreational statutes and that sort of stuff, and can give guidance. Yeah.
Sometimes other entities might be able to provide assistance. So like if you happen to be a land trust, you know, reaching out to the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts for what legal resources they might be able to provide, or you know, possibly asking for those kind of resources through the Oregon Recreation and Parks Association. So there might be some kind of professional or land management associations, or also like through city county insurance services. So depending on what kind of entity you are, you might be able to reach out to kind of the association that serves your kind of entities to ask specifically about legal resources would be my recommendation. Any other questions that our panelists might have caught in the chat that you would like to answer live? I saw some good questions about accessibility specifically. And I know Jody has been responding that about some of the OPRD programs that are available. I also want to flag that Travel Oregon's most recent grant cycle had a really big emphasis on accessibility of visitor facilities. And so I think we can probably anticipate some more continued support from that agency for accessibility projects as well.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, across the board, we're funding accessibility improvements, as long as it's, you know, for RTP, it'd be for trails, for other programs, it could be for a variety of outdoor recreation facilities that fit within. And that is something we look at on our grant application too, that you have done that assessment and that considered accessibility and universal access components in your planning.
And I will frame if there's a training component of your kind of accessibility assessment work, if you want to bring in a group like Access Trails or another kind of consultant that specifically does kind of accessibility assessment and consulting, we may be able to support that in the context of our training program by bringing them in as a trainer to local field staff and or volunteers who are participating in that assessment work. Well, we are just about at time, so I did just want to give another round of thank yous to all of our panelists today, and I also hope that now that you see these friendly faces, you'll feel empowered to reach out directly with more questions. These are all, well, I just met Andy today, but he seems great, and I've definitely worked with Reva in the past. So I have personally called all these people with questions before and found them to be friendly and responsive. And the Oregon Trails Coalition also loves to help try to be your trails partner switchboard. So happy to help with that as well. We will post this recording to our blog maybe next week. This is a big week for trails advocacy. So hope you're registered for our newsletter and keeping an eye on all those action alerts, because we need your voice, all of you folks who are in this funding webinar learning about trails and caring about them in your community. So thanks to everyone for their work, presenters and attendees alike. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.